Matthew 6:33, a well-known verse, emphasizes the importance of prioritizing God's kingdom and righteousness above all else. The verse, found in the Sermon on the Mount, encourages believers to seek God's will and agenda first, with the assurance that other needs will be met. Key aspects of Matthew 6:33, seeking God's kingdom. This involves actively pursuing God's will, purpose, and presence in one's life. It's about making God's agenda the priority rather than worldly concerns. Seeking God's righteousness. This means striving to live in accordance with God's moral standards and character. It involves seeking to be holy as God is holy, trusting in God's provision. The verse assures believers that when they prioritize God, He will provide for their needs. This is not a guarantee of worldly wealth, but rather a promise that God will meet their essential needs. Focus on the spiritual. The verse contrasts with a focus on material possessions and earthly concerns, reminding believers to focus on spiritual growth and relationship with God. In essence, Matthew 6:33 calls for a life centered on God, with a focus on His kingdom and righteousness, trusting that He will take care of the rest. You know those moments when gratitude just fills your heart, when everything seems to align perfectly, and you feel truly blessed. I want to share something meaningful with you today about thankfulness, and it comes from one of the most profound pieces of wisdom I've encountered. In Matthew 6:33, we find these powerful words, "But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." Now, you might wonder, what does this have to do with being thankful? Well, everything, actually. Think about it. When we're truly thankful, what are we usually grateful for? The big things, sure, like health, family, or success. But often, it's the small, unexpected blessings that touch us most deeply. That perfect sunset after a hard day, a friend's call right when you needed it, even that parking spot that opened up just as you arrived. Here's the beautiful connection. When we align our hearts with seeking what truly matters, love, kindness, righteousness, everything else seems to fall into place. It's like the universe has this way of providing exactly what we need, often in ways we never expected. I remember a time when I was going through a particularly challenging period. Nothing seemed to be working out. But when I shifted my focus from what I lacked to what really mattered, my relationships, my personal growth, my spiritual journey, something amazing happened. The very things I had been stressing about started resolving themselves almost effortlessly. This verse isn't just about religion, it's about priorities. When we focus on building character, on doing what's right, on contributing to something bigger than ourselves, that's when we find ourselves surrounded by reasons to be thankful. It's like a beautiful cycle. The more we seek goodness, the more good we find to be thankful for. So next time you're feeling grateful, remember this wisdom. Let it remind you that thankfulness isn't just about counting blessings. It's about recognizing that when we align our lives with what truly matters, everything else tends to follow naturally. And that, my friends, is something truly worth being thankful for. Seeking God's kingdom, as taught in Matthew 6:33, means prioritizing a relationship with God and His will above all else. including worldly desires and concerns. It's about aligning one's life with God's purposes and acknowledging His authority in every aspect of life. This involves a commitment to love God and others, and to live righteously, trusting that God will provide for one's needs. Prioritizing God's reign. Seeking God's kingdom means desiring His rule and authority to be established in one's own life, their immediate circle, and even globally. Seeking His righteousness. This involves striving to live according to God's standards of right and wrong, and pursuing a life that is pleasing to Him. Trusting in God's provision. The promise in Matthew 6:33 is that when we prioritize God's kingdom, He will provide for our needs. Love as the foundation. Seeking God's kingdom is fundamentally about love. Loving God with all one's heart, soul, and mind, and loving one's neighbor as oneself. Living a life of obedience. This includes obeying God's commands and precepts, not out of obligation, but out of reverence and love. Eternal perspective. Seeking God's kingdom helps us shift our focus from temporary, earthly concerns to eternal, spiritual realities. Ultimately, seeking God's kingdom is a journey of faith, love, and obedience, where we trust that God will guide us and provide for us as we seek to live according to His will. You can watch this video to learn more about the practical approach to seeking God's kingdom. Seeking God's righteousness means actively pursuing a right,